Hello, welcome again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
I'm Bob Scarborough.
And we are the FAIRtax Guys. And if you are watching on video as opposed to listening to an audio podcast or on one of the radio stations, do not adjust your set. Yes, my face does indeed look like it had a close encounter with one of the steam locomotives back there behind me. It feels about the same way. But this is just kind of a preventive maintenance treatment to make sure I don't get skin cancer. He said I had some pre-cancerous spots and they wanted to wipe them out. I just didn't know they'd use a blowtorch to do it.
Well, you don't look that bad, and like Bob said, if you're watching on a video platform, well, we want to make sure that you don't adjust the color up or down a little bit. There's nothing wrong with your set.
Yes, it is. Of course, the modern TV, some folks will say, what the heck are you talking about? They don't remember the days when TV sets had color controls on them, you know, hue and tint and stuff like that. Today, it's just all automatic, but
Well,
yes.
There are some places deep inside the controls of the computer / monitor / television that you can control the tint.
Yeah, you can. You got to dig through a menu to do that. But whatever. Let's get on with it. Actually, there's not a tremendous amount to go with in this week's Congress.gov segment. Congress is not in session. You would think that if that were the case, there would be nothing going up in Congress.gov, but even out of session, they're still messing with the tax code. Do you believe that?
Sneak it in, you know, everybody's back in their districts, hopefully having meetings with their constituents or maybe even taking a vacation. And they're still out there. Maybe they hit like one of those timed email type things where you can put something together and then say, I want to send this out on 2 weeks from today.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of like the streaming service we've been using to distribute this program, which for the past couple of weeks has not worked right on Facebook. Hopefully it will work right this time. I've been working with tech support, and hopefully we'll get that all figured out. But let's go ahead and get through this, because we got another big pack of lies that we have got to shoot down that is being propagated against the fair tax. But our first Congress.gov segment today, we'll start off with H.R. 5176 to amend the Internal Revenue Code to allow for non-recognition of gain on real property sold for use as affordable housing. I guess that means if you've got this piece of property and you sell it to someone who's going to develop affordable housing on it, and you sell it at a profit, then, well, we just won't make you pay taxes on that particular gain because you sold it for such a noble purpose.
Well, I mean, a lot of people have. I mean, a lot of landlords have individual pieces of property that could come. You know, that may have an old dilapidated house on it, or it may be an active renting situation under Section 8. But I would think that would be a good thing. But the bottom line, and in a benevolent sense, you know, somebody turning their property into affordable housing is in some cases a good thing. But why are we?
Again, that's using the tax code to try to incentivize a particular behavior. You know, if they want people to sell their property because we need more affordable housing, hey, let's use the tax code and get them to do that. Crazy. Okay, number two, H.R. 5143 to amend the Internal Revenue Code to provide authority to add additional vaccines to the list of taxable vaccines. That sounds familiar. I think we've run across this one before.
Yeah. Taxable
vaccines, and you have to amend the tax code to provide authority to add to that list. And we'll just say, all right, that's nuts, and move on. H.R. 5135 to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986, here we go, to impose an additional 1,000% excise tax on the sale of large capacity ammunition feeding devices and semi-automatic assault weapons, and for other purposes. We've seen this one before as well. So again, we're going to use the tax code to push a political agenda.
And that's just exactly what it is. It's a political agenda. We can get into, you know, Second Amendment and all that. Another show, another day.
Not our issue.
Use the tax code. You know, first of all, it's just the way it is in Washington. We can change that by getting rid of the income tax along with the Internal Revenue Service, and moving to a tax on consumption, specifically the fair tax, and make things happen in a way where your activity is private in terms of when and how you pay and how much you pay taxes.
All right. Okay. That's going to wrap up the Congress.gov segment for this one. We're going to get that in, pretty quick. Because we have got a few weeks ago here on Fair Tax Power Radio, we shot down an article that was published on Fox Business that was written by a fellow who owned and operated a tax preparation service. So you would expect him to be ripping into the fair tax. And some of the stuff he said was just absolutely outrageous. So if you want to go back in the archive and see what that's about, we can do that. But there is actually, I think, an equally outrageous pack of lies coming out now from a name that some people might recognize, Grover Norquist. He is not a politician. He does not, hold any office, but he has been a card-carrying member of the political establishment for a long time. And now that the fair tax is going to start getting some attention, it's going to be voted on instead of just sit in the committee and die as it has done for the past couple of decades. Now they're bringing out the guns, and Grover Norquist, who is certainly representing the establishment political position, he actually sent a letter to all of the co-sponsors of H.R. 25 in the House, urging them to withdraw their co-sponsorship because, and a whole long list of stuff, none of which is valid.
Well, here's a man who is president of Americans for Tax Reform.
Yes.
And like a noble organization, and I'm sure advocating for some type of tax reform. But now it appears that what he is in charge of at ATR, Americans for Tax Reform, is the reform of the current income tax, as opposed to something completely different and more efficient.
Absolutely. Let me quote a little bit of this from his letter. It says, "Dear members of Congress, I write to urge you to reconsider your co-sponsorship of the Fair Tax Act of 2023. In the 24 years of the Fair Taxes proposal's existence, House Republicans have declined to hold a single hearing or markup session in the committee, let alone a floor vote." Well, that is not a surprise at all, because House Republicans are just as addicted to lobbyist cash as House Democrats, and they don't want to derail their gravy train, and that's what's going on here.
Well, absolutely, and probably people like ATR, the Americans for Tax Reform, that Grover Norquist is in charge of. It's very possible that he's in that stream, maybe a small creek off to the side of the main flow, but I would think, and boy, I sure would like to get a phone call from him or a letter that says, "Hey guys, you're wrong. I'm doing it, and this is why." But if you read this letter, and can we get the letter posted somewhere where people can actually read it? We can do that.
I'm not sure that we really want to do that, because I don't want to give this guy any more publicity than we can. But I do think that he just needs to be responded to. It says, while the intentions of lawmakers are admirable, abolishing the IRS and zeroing out the income tax, the legislation fails to accomplish these aims. So there's just a wild claim with absolutely no supporting evidence to it. If you abolish the IRS, yes, you will zero out the income tax and you'll get rid of it. And this really made me laugh. About 4 paragraphs down, rather than simply repealing federal income taxes, the fair tax would replace the income tax with we get this, 30% national sales tax on all goods and services, and establish a giant new entitlement program. So he said, we're not going to repeal the federal income tax, we're going to replace it. Well, actually, that's not true either, because a good bulk of the fair tax bill is a list of all of these statutes that will be repealed. So the fair tax bill does indeed repeal the statutory authority to collect an income tax. But then, of course, again, you mischaracterize it as this huge 30% national tax on everything you're going to buy, and refers to the prebate as a giant new entitlement program. Somebody is not playing with a full deck.
Well, the prebate, as we call it, which is essentially a check that goes to every legal resident in the United States, family-wise, based on numbers of people in your family, calculated on the annual poverty level calculation that comes out of the federal government, and then you get that money, and it's almost like instead of waiting until the income tax payment cycle on April 15th, where you send all of your income information to the government and then you see what you get back, you would get that back on a monthly basis ahead of your expenses that come on what you would consider to be essential items that you need to run your family. They give you the check, you decide what you want to spend it on, and that basically untaxes you and untaxes everybody up to the poverty level. The richest person in America gets that benefit. The poorest person in America gets that benefit. And it's rather misleading, and I think that's where these anti-fair tax letters come from, is they just throw a lot of smoke out there and make it difficult for people to discern reality is when it comes to what the tax on consumption actually does.
Yeah, the prebate is not a giant new entitlement program, as this Mr. Norquist implies. It is not a universal basic income scheme, which is that phrase is used a little bit farther down in this letter. The prebate is a tax refund of taxes that was collected from you at the cash register that you don't owe because you do not owe any tax under the fair tax until your spending exceeds the poverty level. So we just give you back all the taxes that you spend on your spending up to the poverty level, and that's a tax refund. It's your own money coming back to you. So it's not a giant entitlement program. You're not taking money from somebody to give it to somebody else. It's not a universal basic income. It's your money. It's no any more than the tax refund that the IRS currently gives. And nobody ever called that a universal basic income scheme. But the fair tax just says we're going to give you back the taxes you pay on your basic necessities, and then beyond that, you'll pay to it. And of course, the next really bogus argument this letter comes up with, replacing our current tax code with a national sales tax would create a system of double taxation on retirees. Now, we've talked about this before. No, any time that you buy something today, the price of everything you buy today, from a new car to a bottle of aspirin to a haircut or whatever, and the price of everything you buy today contains the embedded costs of the income tax system. Right. Income taxes and the compliance costs that come with them are just like any other cost of doing business. They get passed on to the consumer. So the retiree is actually everybody, retirees and everybody else, are paying somebody else's taxes every time they buy something. And of course, Mr. Norquist just kind of suddenly doesn't bother to mention that. He just calls this double taxation. But the fair tax replaces the embedded taxes that are currently in the prices of everything you buy anyhow.
And that's right. And you can decide how much tax you're going to pay based on your spending. And my favorite part about the fair tax, tax on consumption, is it encourages saving. People can now look at the possibility of putting some money away, and encourages saving simply by allowing you to take a closer look at what you're actually buying. And do you need, and can you get by without a certain item, and pocket that money or put it aside, because savings are not taxed under the fair tax. And I think that is an important component that gets missed in all the smoke blowing that goes on with letters like this from Grover Norquist and others. Yeah, Grover, I'm calling you a smoke blower.
Because it's not double taxation. The fair tax replaces the embedded taxes that you're already paying that you don't see on your receipt. The difference is you'll see the fair tax. You don't see how much of the price of your haircut is the barber's income tax. That's an expense that they have to cover, or how much you pay on a new car or anything else. You don't see how much that price is jacked up by these income tax system costs being passed on to you. So the double taxation on retirees, that has been debunked several times, yet it just comes back at you because people will, if you look at that on the surface, it looks, yeah, that looks reasonable, but they don't think it through. When you think it through and you see that you're replacing one tax with another, then that's not double taxation.
I'm going to give Mr. Norquist credit for creative use of bold typeface throughout the letter. You know, like for instance, in the next paragraph down, the fair tax, nor would the fair tax do anything to reduce the size of government. Now, we've never really promoted the fact that the fair tax would reduce the size of government. All we're doing is changing the method of income coming into the government from income to consumption. So, and then followed by probably the third or fourth bold typeface. Fair tax advocates claim the bill would abolish the IRS, in quotes, air quotes. But in fact, it creates at least three new bureaucracies: the Federal Excise Tax Bureau, the Federal Sales Tax Bureau, and the Office of Revenue Allocation.
Has he read the bill and found those things in the bill?
I haven't seen that, and I've read it a number of times. I read it as much as I read publication 17 from the Internal Revenue Service that teaches you how to fill out all the myriad forms that they have.
Yeah, so this is just some more wild stuff that's pulled out of the top of his head. And even if, let's see, just for the sake of argument, say, okay, what if you do get these three new things, a Federal Excise Tax Bureau, the Sales Tax Bureau, and the Office of Revenue Allocation? None of those agencies or bureaus or what have you would have any authority to, administer and enforce the fair tax, because that has been farmed out to the states. Ooh. So even if these federal agencies do come into existence, and I don't think they will, they would not have the power, they would not have the size, they would not have the scope of the current IRS, although Mr. Norquist is kind of implying that we'll still have the IRS, it'll just be called this other stuff. No, enforcement and administration of the fair tax is now farmed out to the states. State departments of revenue will do it, not the federal government.
Right, and the Social Security Administration essentially will be at the lever in the federal level, and they would deal with the states and the outlying Puerto Rico, et cetera, in terms of transferring the revenue collected at the state level at the state, and the state becomes, well, you could probably argue that the state is going to add a few more offices at their level to handle this, but not to the point where you would blow up the state government to handle that. And again, Mr. Norquist, for crying out loud, we're not talking about the fair tax isn't about changing the size and scope of government. That is a battle for somebody else. That's a battle for our elected representatives. It's a battle for you and me. The folks that are watching the program, listening to the program here, it's a battle for us to take on by electing the people that we believe that we can reach out and touch and say, hey, you need to go to Washington and tear this monstrosity down a little bit. We're not changing the amount of money that is being collected. We're only changing the way it is collected. And that's what it does, very simply.
Just for what it's worth, I think the only way you're going to reduce the size of government is to get a balanced budget amendment through a convention of states. Now, that's Bob talking for Bob here. But anyway, that's just no tax reform has a goal of reducing the size of government, because all of the tax reform legislation is written by the people that are running the government, and they don't want the size of government reduced, so that no tax reform has ever had the goal of reducing the size of government. I say that's a different fight with a different set of weapons. But for him to think that the fair tax is portraying itself as a way to reduce the size of government, that's just dead wrong again.
Well, and the thing about the VAT, according to Grover Norquist, president of Americans for Tax Reform, in this letter that he has written to Congress, the value-added tax is the Democrat Party's chosen mechanism for how the United States can be more like Europe with truly unlimited levels of welfare spending. No Republican in Congress should help build for the left a structure guaranteed to collapse into a VAT.
And he seems to think the fair tax is going to turn into a VAT.
Well, no,
So
because
the fair tax is a retail consumption tax and will always be a retail consumption tax. If they wanted to go into a VAT, they would have to just create one legislatively, and I don't think you could do that with the fair tax already in place.
well, and this is a sales pitch for the Americans for tax reform. The Americans for Tax Reform. Grover Norquist, president, wrote this letter. His last paragraph is a sales pitch. And what I've learned over my years in this business that I'm in is that the last thing that a person says is what they truly want. They don't necessarily, they use all the other part of the conversation. When you get right down to it, what Norquist wants for Americans for Tax Reform, his company, is to work with Congress to craft and support legislation aimed at reducing the tax burden and restraining the IRS, and respectfully points to the efforts at the state level to reduce income taxes first to a single flat rate and then down towards zero, which of course we know is happening in North Carolina right now.
Yeah, so he says reducing state income taxes down to zero is a good thing. Why is it not a good thing to do that at the federal level?
Oh, yes, but to use the word, the key part of this that I'm taking away from this whole letter is, he points to what's happening at the state level, right? And then it says flat rate. In other words, he respectfully points to the efforts at the state level to reduce income taxes. Still talking about income tax. Keep that in mind, folks, that Washington, the whole pool of operation out there, not just the folks that we elect, but people like Grover Norquist, who is the head of an organization that benefits from what's taking place in Washington, D.C. today. He says that his organization respectfully points to the efforts at the state level to reduce income taxes first to a single flat rate and then down towards zero, which has had extraordinary success in recent years.
Well, may I respectfully respectfully point to Mr. Norquist, Alabama and Georgia, which are both looking to not only reduce, but entirely eliminate their state income taxes. How are they going to do that? Oh, with a consumption tax that's modeled on the fair tax. So if you want to talk about states that are doing it right, Georgia and Alabama are at the top of that list, and Nebraska's in there as well.
Well, and I would say that with all the talk that's going on about tax reform right now, I think Mr. Norquist probably was feeling a little left out and decided to put a 2.25-page letter together and send it out and ask his secretary to please use boldface type on some of it in the key parts. But when you get right down to it, folks, income tax is an income tax, no matter how you paint it, no matter how it's put together, no matter how you legislate it, no matter how you put it together. The bureaucracy is still going to do what the bureaucracy is going to do, the unelected fourth branch of government, as I'd like to call them. And the fact that you tell the IRS, well, I think you need to kind of do it this way, they're going to go, yeah, okay, right. And then they're going to go around and do it the way they want to. So here we are. You have an opportunity, folks, to call your congressman and your congresswoman, your representative, and especially while they're home right now, hey, guess what? Go out there, talk to them, say, hey, we want to make sure that we understand that you are either for the Internal Revenue Service or you're for the elimination of it, because that is one of the key things that the fair tax will do is zero out and get rid of the Internal Revenue Service and all of the complicated forms and things that go along with it. The income tax goes away.
Yeah, well, I say that this letter is full of the same kind of just, wild suppositions and out stuff pulled off the top of your head, claims made about the fair tax that just aren't so. And it says, sorry, Mr. Norquist, you are a part of the political establishment, and we, the people, are going to get rid of the Internal Revenue Service. We're going to get rid of the income tax, and we're going to get rid of all this junk, the withholding and the payroll taxes, all the junk that comes with it. That is what true tax reform is. Most of these times when they're talking about what they're calling tax reform is actually what the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was, tax relief, not tax reform. They're not going to change the way the system works. They just want to tweak some stuff inside of it.
Yep,
But,
that's exactly
I'll
right.
tell you, we got about 3.5 minutes left. If there's any kind of positive spin, Bob, to be put on this, it's the fact that, why didn't Grover write this letter when the fair tax first came out? Why didn't he write it 5 years ago? Why is he doing it now? And the reason they're doing it now, we've touched on it, is because this is going to be the first Congress where the fair tax doesn't just simply get introduced, shuffled off into the Ways and Means Committee, and left there to die for the rest of the session. There is going to be a vote on this session, and the political establishment is scared to death that we, the people, are going to like the idea of bringing home our whole paychecks. We're going to like the idea of never having to file another tax return. We're going to like the idea of getting a tax refund every month. And the political establishment folks don't want to give up their gravy train in the income tax system. So that's why they're coming at the fair tax now instead of all the
Anytime
previous
in
two.
the last 24 years.
Mm-hmm. So
And
I guess the fact that these letters exist from Grover Norquist and from that guy that owns the tax preparation software, the fact that people are now taking shots at the fair tax tells me that they're scared of it. They don't want it to happen. And every one of these things is coming from people that have a vested interest in maintaining the current system, not making it better for we the people.
absolutely. And the other side of that too, and it has to do with that gravy train that everybody's on. Even some of that gravy train sloshes out of the halls of Congress onto organizations like Americans for Tax Reform. And the challenge is those folks, I absolutely know it without a shadow of a doubt. In my heart, I know that all of our representatives that are up there, now they won't tell you this, but they are trying to figure out a way to make sure that that gravy train continues and doesn't dry up. If indeed the fair tax becomes the law of the land at whatever level or time that it does. And I believe eventually inertia will gain, speed will build, and you will see this come to be. The fair tax will come to fruition.
Well, this letter is just like the other one. It's a railing at a bunch of straw men rather than what the fair tax actually is. They're railing at what their perception in their head is and just kind of these wild things that they're pulling out of the top of their head. Now, Americans for Fair Taxation, no doubt, is going to have a response here. As of the day we're recording this, I'm not sure what that response is or where it's going to come from. But we, the fair tax folks, are not going to let these crazy things go unchallenged. And so you can help. Again, as Bob mentioned earlier, if your representative is not a fair tax co-sponsor, urge them to become one. If your representative is a fair tax co-sponsor, urge them not to listen to this establishment dribble and to continue to stand up for what's going to be the best tax system that is ever made if we can get it done.
Absolutely. So, totally agree. And, fairtax.org, folks, is the website. Of course, you can reach out to us at various places, the FAIRtax Guys, on YouTube and Facebook. And we have an email address too, don't we, Bob?
Yeah, the FAIRtaxGuys@gmail.com. I don't look at that every day, but I do try to look at it 2 or 3 times a week. And unfortunately, that's going to wrap up this edition of Fair Tax Power Radio. We are a slap out of time. Thank you so much for watching and listening and sharing the videos. I'm Bob Paxton.
I'm Bob Scarborough.
We are the Fair Tax Guys, reminding you the fair tax is the only truly fair tax. And once you understand it,
you'll demand it.
So tell me how it works.
It's probably changed since the last time I saw it, but the short answer would be, you want to take this one?
Oh, sure. Okay. Imagine bringing home everything you make. You don't get taxed for saving or accumulating wealth, and your boss doesn't get taxed more even if he pays you more.
Wow, see, that's amazing.
And so the end result of all that is the cost of producing products and running a business goes down, so things cost less. And on top of all that, imagine every criminal, non-citizen, and under-the-table worker also paying taxes.
That's amazing.
That's